All right, guys, we're going to continue with adding and subtracting tenths. So as the numbers get larger, we have to make sure that we group together our place values. Sometimes regrouping is necessary when we're doing these. So I've given you kind of two strategies of what you can do when you are adding using numbers with tenths. There are more than two, by the way, but here are two. So one I call the count forward and count back strategy. It basically means that we take our adding and we count the numbers going forward. We still group them by place value, but we don't worry about regrouping very much until the very end. So for a number like 3.2 plus 2.5, we would say, well, we know that 3 and 2 is 5, and that 2 tenths and 5 tenths is 7 tenths, so my answer would be 5 and 7 tenths. For one that requires a little bit more thinking, something like 2.7 plus 1.8, we would still group 2 plus 1, and then 7 and 8, 7 tenths and 8 tenths makes 15 tenths, which is 1.5. So that would be 3 plus 1.5, so that's 4.5. In subtracting, we're working backwards, so we're counting back. It's called the count back strategy. So once again, for 5.7 minus 3.4, we would still do our grouping. So we know 5 minus 3 is 2, and 7 tenths minus 4 tenths, that's 3 tenths. So we have 2 and 3 tenths. It's a little more difficult if we have ones that would require us to go into the negatives. So if we think 4.2 minus 2.8, well, I know 4 minus 2 is 2. If I have 2 tenths and I subtract 8 tenths, that means I actually go 6 tenths into the negative, all right? So then I would take my 2 tenths and I would subtract 6 tenths, which would give me 1.4, right? So my question is, or my answer is 1.4. The borrowing and carrying strategy is one that I use a little bit more often, but it's a little bit less in your head. The thing about the count back, count forward strategy is it is mental math. So typically you don't have to write that down. When you're using borrowing and carrying, it's more of a write down kind of strategy. So sometimes it's better to use this one and sometimes it's better to use this one. Right? For me, 3.2 plus 2.5, I would probably more use the count back strategy or count forward strategy. But if we were using the stacking strategy, we would say, well, 3.2 plus 2.5, and you'll notice that the decimals are lined up, right above each other. The 2 tenths and the 5 tenths are right above each other. The 3 and the 2, they're both in the ones place, they're right above each other. If we're using the stacking strategy, very important to keep your place values lined up. So we have 2 plus 5, which is 7, and then 3 plus 2, which is 5, so our answer is 5.7. Sometimes you have to do some carrying. So I probably would be more likely to use, for 2.5 plus 1.8, more likely to use this strategy than this one. So you can use both, depending on how the questions work. So for this one here, you'll see that everything's nicely stacked up. I have 7 and 8, which is 15. I would carry the 1 over to the ones place. This means 15 tenths, right? 1.5. So now we put that 1 in the ones place where it belongs. 1 plus 2 is 3, and 3 plus 1 is 4, so my answer is 4.5, 4.5. Subtracting, we can stack also. If we end up with regrouping, we do something called borrowing. Up here it's called carrying, down here it's called borrowing. So for subtracting, if I have what I call a simple stacker, 5.7 minus 3.4, I would probably be more likely to use this mental math strategy. But basically what I do is I have my place values nicely lined up. 7 minus 4 is 3, 5 minus 3 is 2, so my answer is 2.3. A little bit tougher is this one here, 4.2 minus 2.8. Over here I was talking about making it negative. Here what we do is we do borrowing. We've talked about borrowing before, but let's just take a quick look at it. So what I've done is I have, well, 2 minus 8 and 4 minus 2. Now, if I went to the store with $2 and I wanted to buy something that was $8, I couldn't do it, not unless I borrowed. So what I did is I took the 4 from here and I have taken 1 from there and moved it over to the tenths place. Basically what I have now, instead of 4, sorry, let me just get this so it's, instead of having 4 plus 0.2, what I have now is 3 plus 1.2. I haven't taken anything away, I've just regrouped my numbers. Right? I borrowed from the ones place to help with the tenths place. So now I have 12 minus 8, that's 12 tenths, which 12 minus 8 is 4. And then 3 minus 2, right? 3 ones minus 2 ones is 1. So now my answer is 1.4. So those are two different strategies that you can use. We have actually talked about more strategies than that. We talked about number lines and things like that. On the other side of the page, you have 10 questions. 5 are adding, 5 are subtracting, and hopefully they will, those strategies will work for you for figuring these answers. I'll come back with a review right away. Thanks.